until I checked, I didn't realize it had been this long. It has been 2 whole years since the Wayland window placement problem was first properly being discussed. This is the fact that some applications want to position themselves on your screen. They want to choose where their window appears, and this is most relevant when an application has multiple windows. There is a multi-window mode in GIMP, but this is mainly a thing for CAD and scientific applications. You probably know about KiCad and how they don't want to support Wayland. This is one of the reasons why they don't want to support it, because this is a really important feature. This has been through a number of iterations. We have this protocol here, add ext placement protocol for output relative window placement preferences, add XDG alignment protocol for window placement control, and the latest one, add ext zones protocol for area limited window positioning and layering. I have a lot of respect for Matthias Klump, who really wants to have this problem resolved, because I would not have been able to keep this up for multiple years with hundreds upon hundreds of comments across all of these threads. That's incredible. Now, there are multiple parts of this which some applications only want part of. So the idea of window restoration, where you reopen a window and it remembers where it last was, that is a separate protocol, and that is something that a lot of people are on board with doing. But the idea of the first time you spawn a window and it being able to select where it wants to appear, that's not something that is widely supported. Or you select a different layout and then it automatically places the windows into that layout. There is a lot of debate over whether or not this should be done, how this should be done, if it's going to be done. And, yeah, this discussion has gone on so long, has gotten so heated at times. This has led to some policy changes in how discussions need to be handled in Wayland, because some people cannot control themselves, and there are developers who really want this functionality to be available. So there is a KDE plugin, and this is sort of mainly focused around the automotive space, and this is now getting packaged over in Fedora. So this is a thing that you can just use, but it's not the latest version of the protocol. So it's this weird, slightly older version, which creates even more drama. And there are people over in the automotive Linux space who are basically saying that this is all dumb, this is all ridiculous, and just using the protocol as it is. They want the functionality, they need the functionality, and they don't want to wait multiple years for this discussion to actually get somewhere, so they just said, screw it, we're just doing it ourselves. And there hasn't been real progress on this, but this is why we are talking about it. There was a bit of a problem, we'll say, and temporarily the thread was locked. It has now been opened, so hopefully things can progress a little bit better. Now we'll get to what led to the block, but before then, let's just outline what the protocol actually is, so we might have some understanding on why there are issues with wanting to implement this. The initial protocol proposal, which used absolute monitor-based coordinates, go away, was knacked by Western and GNOME later, so it is in the ext namespace now. That is 247, that is this one over here. Before pursuing that protocol for inclusion in staging under the ext namespace, I would really like to find a more universally applicable solution for this problem though. Maybe we can even improve the design instead of doing what X11 did. So that original protocol was effectively the solution that X11 has, that macOS has, that Windows has, that basically every other system has, and the main reason, there's a lot of reasons for why people didn't want it. A lot of those reasons were, we don't want to implement X11 again. Some of them were, there are other compositor systems like a VR compositor where this system wouldn't necessarily work, and there's a whole big discussion specifically about that approach. that one was probably never going to happen. There are a lot of people in Wayland who are very against having any sort of global positioning system. Much of it does just boil down to the fact that it is like X11. So a different attempt was born, using relative positioning, where windows position themselves in relation to other windows. That is this one over here, the XDG alignment. This got a lot of good feedback that I had to think about, with a bunch of corner case issues as well as more fundamental problems raised. At the same time, I also got exposed to a few more styles of applications that people would like to have supported, and ultimately trying to implement a bit of that protocol, I came to the conclusion that it will just make absolutely everybody unhappy with a compromise solution. In this case, rather than having a global positioning system, windows are positioned relative to the main window, which is not how anything else works, and would create a lot of porting problems. Application porters from other OSs would be unhappy, as there'd be no way to really map existing behavior to the Wayland world. All of those other operating systems do things based on a global positioning system. This would be based on a relative system, and it just gets really funky to make sure things actually place correctly. App developers would be unhappy, so this is new app developers, as it limits the application design to what paradigms the Compositor supports with regards to window placement. Compositor developers would be unhappy, as they'll need to implement a lot of style logic and alignment paradigms in their Compositor while still having no idea what the application was trying to achieve. For an application like GIMP, it would be functional enough, but anything more complex than that, and the solution just doesn't work. The second protocol is basically compromise on everything, try to appease the Wayland developers, but don't actually solve any of the problems. And that's the problem. It might have been accepted, but it just wasn't going to fix anything. So this protocol is pulling back on that and trying to make something actually useful and still trying to appease the Wayland people. It's been 2 years, so that's going well. The new protocol in this merge request introduced the concept of a zone, a new per-client coordinate system provided by the Compositor and attached to one output, in which it can place its windows. The client can only know window positions relative to the zone the Compositor has assigned to it, and a zone can be a defined rectangle with fixed dimensions or an infinite space without any limits. Also known as a global coordinate system. Now, if you don't understand why this has taken 2 years to be implemented, this is basically a global coordinate system with extra steps, and yeah. There has to be a global coordinate system for this solution to work. So it's just, how do we implement a system like that and trick Wayland people into thinking that it's anything but that? A zone can be reshaped by the Compositor at any time, but must always include all the windows of the client that were assigned to it. Every client may only have one zone and can share the zone with trusted other processes by sharing its handle with them. That way, any external process that is contributing a window can create its window in relation to the other windows by sharing the same coordinate system. So basically, it's creating a virtual monitor for each of your applications. That's effectively what it's doing. And below this, we just have a bunch of examples of how this could be used. Please don't use transparent images with black text on GitLab, because some people use dark mode. These are impossible to read. Now, because of the fact that it's effectively a global coordinate system, and it's kinda this one, with some extra stuff to appease Wayland people, there's been just a bit of discourse about it. And I think it's far from the longest, but this is definitely one of the newest protocols that has a long discussion. This, really massive discussion, it's kind of a thing of the past in Wayland. Most of those big discussions are kinda gone now, unless it's the technical intricacies of implementing HDR. That's usually the only thing that gets this much feedback. And because there's been so much discussion over multiple years, this is also one of the longest introductions to a protocol I've ever seen. It tries to cover I like how it says no global coordinate system, no. It's just a lot of relative global coordinate system. Very different, totally different. But because there is this massive discussion about this, every single possible thing that could be brought up over and over again is mentioned in the introduction, because a lot of these things have been hashed out, and this is part of the reason why it's so long. People bringing up the same points again and again. Now, currently there exist two noted implementations. The KWin one, this is the plugin I mentioned earlier, and then one over in SDL, along with something in progress over in QTland. Now, discussion here tends to happen in infrequent bursts, and when that happens in basically anything, you're gonna have people that kind of get frustrated with the process and just don't want to deal with it. And this is part of the reason why there's been some process changes on how you actually discuss a Wayland protocol. This is one notable comment. To be honest, the focus on this protocol instead of session management and surface tractions is infuriating. We should all ignore this merge request until we have the protocols we actually want and see how apps use those protocols and where they are insufficient. This had nothing to do with the discussion, and basically he was just imparting his own opinion on the entire protocol discussion. It's nobody actually wants this protocol, no one should even be involved in this, and this just does nothing but derails the discussion and gets people arguing about things that are entirely irrelevant. If you don't like the protocol and you don't want to be involved in it, you don't have to be involved in it, but you don't have to come along and say, oh, all of you people doing this work, stop doing that work, you're all wasting your time. If you watch any of my older Wayland protocol videos, you would know that comments like this are incredibly common and were never productive, and I am very happy to see that doing this is just not allowed anymore. If you have problems, raise the problems, don't try to derail everything. As there is a lot of older discussion and things I've covered in prior videos, we're going to jump ahead to the end of 2024. So this was around about the launch of the Cosmic Compositor Alpha, and this is just Matthias congratulating Victoria and the rest of the team on the release of the Alpha. But this is the main part I want to talk about. With the zones concept, an app can place its windows within the zone. So if you have an app that does that, and then you switch to tiling mode, what would actually happen? You could make the tiling space the zone, and just reject the request of the apps to place the windows, but still allow for it to query the current window positions. This would be perfectly fine with the current protocol. Or you could dissolve the zone by forcing all the windows of the client to leave it, then you'll restore it once the user switches back to floating mode. I want to bring this one up because a lot of people in the thread talk about difficulties with tiling and how this is one of the areas where this protocol just wouldn't be able to function, sort of ignoring the fact that even though you can position things on X11, there were still functional X11 window managers. From Draculix, otherwise known as Victoria Breckenfield, I don't think we will pursue implementing EXT zones very soon. If not, some contributor picks it up, as we simply have too much stuff of higher priority on our plate. Keep in mind, this was very early in the alpha, and I like this idea of the initial 1.0 release being sometime soon, which is still a few months out. You know, you're not technically wrong. At this point, it was about a month and a year away. So, it's close, but at the time, System 76 did actually think the 1.0 would be coming out sometime soon. However, I of course have some thoughts about how Cosmic is likely to implement this, especially with regards to tiling. First of all, I think the floating case is rather obvious. Given Cosmic conceptually only has one workspace per output, a new zone in the floating case would be roughly the output size minus any shell components, mostly our panel, and if you have multiple panels. For the tiling case, I plan to actually make a zone into a tile and let the application manage its windows however it likes inside the tile. Most window management operations would affect the whole zone instead of shifting individual windows around, essentially creating a stacked subspace within the tiling layout. This is very different from how a lot of people would approach this problem. A lot of tilers would just say, I'm just not going to worry about it, and if we're tiling, the windows just get placed into a tile. In this case, though, Victoria is saying that the tile would act, again, like a mini virtual monitor, and then windows can place themselves wherever they want in that space. I don't know if that would be the best approach, as a lot of people who are doing tiling want everything to tile, but conceptually it sounds very interesting. From another person, have you considered moving this to the experimental directory that has looser merging requirements? I'll consider that once the necessary procedural changes are actually accepted and we have more people who actually iterate on it. We have an annoying chicken and egg problem here, with compositors needing toolkits to support it, and toolkits, due to the amount of work involved, are waiting on compositors to signal a clear intention that they actually want to support this. And that's the thing about moving it to experimental. Even if this protocol got merged, if nobody is willing to implement it, then you've not actually achieved anything, right? Like, anyone can make an XML file and write out a Wayland protocol. The Wayland protocol isn't useful until it has implementations. And it does have them, but not wide enough to be something that is available on the general desktop. Only something where sort of niche use cases are basically saying, we're gonna do it, we don't care what everyone else is doing. And following that, we had a couple of devs pop in to talk about various real-world use cases they have where they want to be able to support this in their project, and they're not able to do so because, you know, the protocol is still in this weird state. And this happens a lot in this thread. Devs will pop in to say, I really want this, I need this for my project, and then nothing ever happens following that. Now let's once again jump ahead to about 3 months ago. Is there any update on this? I've seen the conversation is stalled. Is the protocol ready? So the protocol at the time was mostly dud and tested in production because there's, you know, automotive use cases and things like that. It now needs acts, so project members to say, we acknowledge this protocol, we want to implement it, and then a formal review. There's been a lot of informal ones, but the formal one is important. And there were still issues at the time, but besides that, I'm not aware of any more issues, so the primary thing that's missing now is the axe, but understandably project members are busy and will still need time to look into this. I love how much optimism he has, even though this has been a discussion where there's been so much argument about it, and you can never appease people with this protocol. It's just not going to happen. Whilst there's the library implementation in SDL, whilst there's the KDE plugin, one thing that would be nice is a client implementation application that is actually making use of this. KiCad would be nice. I don't know if they would be willing to accept patches for that, but yeah. Also, WX widgets is complicated, but this could be implemented in something and could show the actual real-world usage of this. Right now, though, that doesn't actually exist. Well, it does exist, but not for any standard desktop applications. And this is where some of the criticism comes back. As far as I can tell, there are still no implementations of the spirit of this protocol. The title says this is about area limited positioning, but the KDE extension sets the limited area to be the entire output minus the taskbar. And SCL assumes the origin of the limited area maps to the origin of the output, so maps to the entire display. Therefore, I don't think the spirit of the implementation requirement has been satisfied. So this spirit thing is basically, again, Wayland people desperately don't want to implement a global coordinate system, and this protocol is effectively a roundabout way of doing a global coordinate system. You set the relative area to be the entire area, right? So it's technically relative, but it achieves the goal that you want. Now let's once again jump ahead to about 2 weeks ago. It looks like Fedora is going to start shipping the Zones plugin, that being the one I showed you before, the KDE Zones plugin, in the official repos. This seems problematic as the plugin in the KDE Automotive repo is based on an older version of the protocol than the current version here, and as the protocol is still pending and unversioned, this result in compatibility issues down the road. Understandably, there are companies internally using the old version in the Automotive repo, but I've also been asked to occasionally update the SDL branch, which follows the upstream version of the protocol found here by users of it. So there are basically 2 incompatible versions of this protocol now in use. Use seems to be spreading even without official adoption, and that's not necessarily a good thing if result in future compatibility mess. And this right here is the problem that is occurring in Wayland. Developers desperately want this protocol, desperately need this protocol, and are going to take anything they can get. And if Wayland drags its feet, and there's all of these things where it's like, oh no, we can't implement this reason, oh, I don't want this in my desktop, all of this stuff, eventually the app devs are gonna say, okay, we don't care anymore, and we're just gonna circumvent the whole Wayland protocol adoption process. We're gonna do things through plugins, and there's nothing you can do to stop this. This is what happens when you don't have an actual standards body that is able to talk through problems and focus on issues that real-world app developers want, rather than this ideologically perfect environment. On the one hand, I'm of course very happy because it underlines the demand for this and why we should have this protocol. On the other hand though, I never expected it to end up in production that fast, and this will indeed cause problems. So TLDR, I share your concern, but I see no way to resolve this. The only way is to get this protocol merged into Wayland and implemented in the desktops. The best I can think of is to work, again, towards harder adoption, all this good stuff. Now here we have Zavish Ugal of the KDE project. In a lot of cases, KDE is pretty on board with just implementing basically anything. This is one of those areas where it's so fundamentally against what some people want from Wayland that even some KDE developers have issues with the protocol. However, I will respect wanting to actually focus on the merits of the protocol, not wanting things to just boil down to but X11 and Win32. Now, I do think these are not entirely unproductive, but I can understand not wanting to deal with them after they've been mentioned 100 times, right? Everybody knows that X11 does this, Windows does this, macOS does this. That doesn't need to be rehashed again and again. Everybody's aware of this point. With that out of the way, these are the issues he finds important. This protocol uses integer logical coordinates, which are not sufficient for all setups. Specifically, unless you have an integer scale, the frame extends are extremely unlikely to be an integer logical unit large. So, fractional, blah blah blah, all that good stuff. The protocol is extremely likely to be misused by applications to restore window positions instead of using the session restoration protocol. This is true, and I think this is a valid point, but to ensure that is less likely to happen, I think there needs to be a bigger push to get session restoration implemented, so that seems like the more sensible way to do things. If every toolkit is just using the session restoration protocol, unless somebody is going out of the way to do something stupid, and you're never going to stop someone going out of the way to do something stupid, most people are not going to be using that. Similarly, it already came up in discussions of this merge request that it's extremely likely to be misused by applications to avoid implementing the proper top-level drag protocol. This would be a really bad outcome and would cause bug reports to us when this hack inevitably misbehaves. Again, if things are implemented properly in the toolkit and they're properly using that protocol, I find that unlikely. There are going to be cases where people, again, do stupid things, but if everything else is in place by the time this happens, I don't see that as a major concern. It also seems likely to me that some applications will use this to implement things like custom notifications or top-level pop-ups that aren't XDG pop-ups. Much more importantly, just like with the previous 2 points, there is nothing generic the Compositor can do about it without breaking legitimate use cases for this protocol. This one, I think, is a fair point. I don't like applications just making their own pop-ups. At the time, you can already have in-app pop-ups, so I don't really consider it to be that big of a concern. They can already spawn an additional window. It's just going to spawn in the top corner. So, or you can have like a child window that's part of the toolkit, right? Like, these are things you can already do. I just don't see this as a major concern. As the Compositor has no information about whether or not the client is placing multiple windows and when it would be done creating and placing those multiple windows, it can't do any central things with its positioning policy. For example, if an app does misuse the protocol to restore window position of its single window, knowing that it only opens that one window, the compositor could apply its normal positioning instead and ignore all further requests from that application. If an app opens 3 windows on a currently inactive display, which is frustratingly common with X11 apps, the compositor should, at a minimum, have enough information to move these windows to the active display as a group. My understanding is the protocol can be used to specify, like, specifically the monitor you want to be using, so you could, like, I don't understand this one. Like, if you say the zone is limited to the currently active monitor, then that couldn't happen. If that does happen, then that would be on the compositor for not implementing its zones correctly, unless I'm misunderstanding the point here. The purpose of the protocol seems rather unclear. It's not unclear, it's just all the discussion happened in prior protocols where this was already trying to be implemented, and yeah, this has been hashed out a million times before. The previous points make me suspect the compositor implementation is doing anything else than mapping a zone to the full output area and exactly applying the client requested position would be quickly considered buggy by application developers and users. I will grant you this one. As I've been saying, zones are basically a roundabout way of doing global coordinates. Like, let's just be honest. I know people are going to argue it's something different when they're trying to implement the protocol because the phrase global coordinates terrifies Wayland developers, but that's what this effectively is. Productive ways to move forward. Complete the session restore protocol and adopted by apps. I completely agree. This is something that I think everybody would like to see. I think that protocol is from 2020? And I don't think it's even a controversial protocol, it's just really complicated to do. Explain what's missing with the current parent-child associations in XDG Shell and find a way to fix it outside of an otherwise unrelated protocol. And last but not least, look into alternative approaches for positioning. I know this has been discussed a lot already, but I don't think this is an unsolvable problem. Multiple years, multiple protocols, and more discussion, more new ideas. What's going to happen is 10 years from now, this protocol is still going to be being discussed, and eventually someone's going to come along like, I don't know, Valve, and they're just going to implement it, and they're going to say, you know what, this is the way we do it now, and you just have to accept it, because at the end of the day, Wayland is not changing how application development is being done on Windows, on macOS. Chromium has there's like a web protocol that is wanting to do window positioning for PWAs and other sort of web apps. So this is just not a thing that you're ever going to change in Wayland, and holding out until the end of time is just, all it's doing is just delaying the inevitable. Eventually, this is going to be what has to be implemented. And this was the start of people causing problems. I don't know who was leaving comments in here, but I have some names in mind. That's all I'll say. I think one of the biggest problems with this protocol discussion is every single reply at this point is an essay. So every single reply to the essay has to be another essay. And Matthias Klump goes into every single point that was brought up here that in many ways has been discussed over and over again. Some of them are new points, fair enough, but this is why I don't know how anyone can still deal with this. Like, having to sit down and write 1,000-word reply to every single comment, like, that takes some real commitment. But from another person, multiple times across multiple threads, it's been pointed out, sometimes with reference to actual projects, that a significant slice of applications will just declare Wayland not fit for purpose or broken if it doesn't present an API that something like Qt can abstract over so the application developers can continue to prioritize coding against the interaction flow that works on Windows, macOS, and X11, and then somewhere way down the line, Wayland in that order of relevance. This has all been discussed before. fundamentally, this is a Wayland is not Apple and cannot dictate terms of downstream API consumer problems. And I've been saying this for years, and I'm so happy that people are actually saying this. I know, yes, I know the whole X11 does this, Windows does this. This is like a hashed out thing. But a part of me is happy that people are just willing to say that Wayland is not Apple. You don't get to decide how every other platform does things. And I don't think Xavier is being disrespectful here. I think he wants to do things a better way. But this is just like an insurmountable problem for Wayland. And I do legitimately think that we'll get to a point eventually where all of this just has to go away. Even Matthias Klump, who is generally really respectful, is saying this at this point. Why is it too much to ask for a Wayland Compositor to implement a compatibility layer for a feature that exists and is in active use on macOS, Windows, X11, Chrome OS, and has been defined as a web standard? Why do we make the lives of multi-window application developers excessively hard on Wayland while no other desktop computing platform does that? Who knows? I'm not dismissing your concerns. I think we should absolutely design this protocol to be as abuse-proof as possible and make it as good as possible. But I do not think that passing all the work onto app developers is fair, and in this particular instance, it makes applications pretty much impossible to port properly. And in response to that, Xavier mentions the existence of XWayland being the compatibility layer. And this is true to an extent, and it is going to be around long into the future, but it's not supposed to be the end goal. XWayland is supposed to be a position you can go to as you eventually port properly over to Wayland. Your stopping point shouldn't be XWayland because Wayland is not suitable for implementing your application. Toolkits are dropping support for X11 in modern versions. X11 will receive less and less testing over time. X11 has bugs today that suck for application developers to work around, and X11 does not support scaling on high DPI windows properly, especially if you have multiple screens, and it does not support HDR, and both of these are very desirable features in professional environments. Suggesting XWayland is not the solution for a problem for existing apps in Wayland. It is deliberately not solving the problem on Wayland. That's the whole point of XWayland. It's X11. It's just, you can keep doing your X11 thing on Wayland, whilst Wayland gets to a point where it's more suitable for you to port your application. Zamunda and others, Zamunda being Xavier Hugel. It feels like the impasse is you worrying the protocol might be abused by clients, e.g. for things like top-level drag, versus me saying the protocol is designed in such a way that it can't be abused for most things, and that clients should be trusted to some extent to do the right thing with regards to session management. I definitely stand by my opinion that we designed the protocol to be very resilient against being abused, with the only exception being that single window apps could use it to restore their window position instead of using session management instead. But for that, I think we can trust toolkits to pick the right protocol for the job. So to get more data and to move this forward at all, how would you and the other people involved feel if I would invoke the experimental protocol procedure for this protocol? That way both toolkits and compositors could implement it better behind a compatibility switch, and we could get some data on how things would play out in the real world. Experimental protocols are useful when the implementation is the issue, or some details of the protocol aren't figured out yet and people need to experiment with it. Neither is relevant here. There are simply fundamental problems with the approach that will not go away if you rename the protocol to have an XX in the name. It's your right to get an experimental XML merged into this repository if you want that, but I have no interest in an implementation in KWin, no matter what the namespace it's in. So this isn't even a matter of, submit patches and we'll consider it. This is, I don't want this in KDE in its current state. From Matthias, first of all, thank you for engaging and providing feedback. I value this a lot. However, I do want to express my frustration, and I hope you can follow my view here. This is after multiple years of pushing for this protocol, screaming into the void, and I am surprised that Matthias can still be this respectful. I have a lot of respect for the work he is doing here. I want you to acknowledge the issue that needs to be addressed as valid, and we both want more applications to run well on Wayland. However, you want some other way for this to work. In doing so, you dismiss the work I've done in the past 2 years on this. I tried alternatives, I was so confident in XGG alignment that I proposed it as a protocol. However, while developing it, it became obvious that any such solution that was expressive enough to support existing apps would necessarily devolve into a worse version of ext zones, making everyone unhappy. You are of course free to disagree with the analysis of a fellow engineer, but that does not solve the issue. Apps are still broken. So far, nobody has proposed anything better than ext zones, and you said you no time or interest to work on it. This is the worst part. Nobody else is trying to propose a better solution. Everybody has issues with the protocol, but nobody has a better way. The better way ultimately evolves into these apps shouldn't be supported, this is a bad UX model. That's pretty much what happens. I'm not saying that Xaver thinks that, but a lot of other people that have issues with this protocol, that's the core of their argument. They don't like the existence of multi-window apps and want them to go away. Therefore, what I take from a state like this is this as unspoken feedback, that's a sentence. Either I don't trust the work you put into this and want someone to magic up some solution that I like better, or I don't like this in general and I want to kill this in general. Apps be damned. Both are not great because both are not sentiments I can address by improving the protocol. I have done the research and prototyping, and I am confident in ext zones, and if it's the latter, there wouldn't be a solution in general. Meanwhile, multi-window applications remain broken on all Wayland compositors, which makes Linux the only desktop operating system that doesn't support them. macOS, Windows, and X11-based desktop environments support them just fine, and on Chrome OS, you can at least suggest initial positioning, and the W3C window management spec suggests Google wants to allow more on all platforms. This is about implementing it into every single web browser. I really tried to get more toolkits involved in Wayland protocol conversations, but they all don't want to consider it worth their time because their needs will get ignored anyway. Asking someone else to rewrite the world isn't really productive, and that definitely goes in both directions. There has to be a compromise. What would have been productive would be to address your concerns within the bounds of this protocol as much as possible. For example, while currently compositors are open to submit a window position on every change, we could change the protocol to only allow the app a window position when the user finished dragging it. That would solve your concern about it being used for top-level drag, even though I don't think that's a likely scenario, but I can't find solutions in code and policy for fundamental opposition. I want applications to work in scientific and industrial environments, so the only productive way forward that I see is to polish up the KWin Automotive plugin and recommend that for these environments. Basically, again, just saying, circumventing the whole Wayland protocol discourse and just implementing in a protocol so that developers can actually use it, and any users who want this feature just have to install the protocol. And from there, we had more application developers talking about how they desperately want this feature, they need this feature, and they cannot support Wayland until this is the case. And this is where things spiraled out of control. Every so often, there's a bit of a crash out on this thread, because to some people, it feels like their requirements are being ignored. They see every other platform that manages to implement this functionality, but somehow it's just not possible on Wayland. And there's technical reasons for that. It's not just because nobody wants to do it. In some cases, there are people that don't want to do it. But to an app developer, after multiple years, everything else supporting it, it just seems like you're being ignored. Especially with responses like this one. This topic was discussed at length in the past many times, and each time Wayland developers have rejected the idea of legacy/compatibility extensions. I would recommend focusing on the new use case this protocol enables here to move forward, and stop rehashing the legacy and compatibility discussion. I understand why Simon is saying this, but at the same time, this isn't legacy on any other platform. This is standard functionality, and these devs feel like they're just being ignored. Now, the legacy term isn't inherently a bad thing. This is just how things are being described within Wayland, but if you don't have that background, if you don't have that context, it does understandably feel like people are demeaning your work, and again, just ignoring standard basic functionality. And this is the last comment before the thread was put on a timeout. One could argue that preventing applications from controlling their own window positions in any way was an experiment. If so, it is a failed experiment. Microsoft could force applications to stop accessing hardware directly because Windows was a large enough market to make the move profitable. Apple and Google can force developers to adjust to their whims because they control markets large enough that it is profitable for developers to keep up. Desktop Linux does not have that kind of market share, except possibly in certain extremely niche fields, but embedded developers have full control over which compositor they use. In most cases, they're not using one, but again, instead, this protocol is already deployed on embedded systems that are shipped to end users, notably in automotive use cases. There are applications for which this protocol is needed to provide the best possible user experience. There are other applications for which an equivalent UX could be achieved without this protocol, but only by spending so much development effort that continuing to support Linux is simply not economically feasible. This protocol is already deployed in the wild, support is currently being added to STL3, and I believe Qt as well. There is already an out-of-tree KWin plugin being used for serious work. Not merging this protocol into Wayland protocols is not going to prevent it from being used, it only means that it will not be standardized. There is already precedent for this in WLR layer shell, that's from wroots, which is non-standard but is supported by a vast number of compositors. I hope that ext zones does not become another example. This is going to happen. This is going to happen because I don't see anything changing with this discussion here. I see this being a protocol that ends up being implemented through other means and just circumventing the Wayland system, and then at some point somewhere down the line, they're going to have to try to clean this up, and it's going to be so much more work than just accepting the protocol. But what are your thoughts? Where do you think this is going to go? Do you think this is ever going to be properly cleaned up? And do you think we're just going to be 10 years down the line and there's going to be a bunch of different incompatible plugins and toolkits are just going to deal with it? And then eventually it's going to be hey, maybe we should try to standardize this now, and good luck with that. I don't know. Anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video. If you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribe to Liberapay, linked in the description down below. Go like the video, go subscribe. I guess we're doing this in a different order today. I don't know why. Anyway, I want to go. I want to get some lunch, so catch you guys later.